Today, we're doing things a little differently. We're not just discussing a book, we are opening an official investigative case file. Our target? What you might call conventional wisdom. And our method is a kind of forensic economic analysis designed to expose the hidden side of, well, everything. Let's get started. So let's start with the most important rule for this entire investigation. This is not about morality, how we wish people would behave. This is about economics, looking at the hard data to see how the world actually works. We're completely ignoring what people say and focusing only on the evidence of what they do. So here's how we're going to break this down. First, we'll go over the tools every good economic detective needs. Then, we'll open 3 very different case files. One on parents, one on cheaters, and one on criminals. And at the very end, we'll deliver our final verdict based on all the evidence. Okay, first things first. Every good detective needs their toolkit, right? So before we start looking at the evidence, we have to understand the methods we're going to use to analyze it. This is really the heart of that whole Freakonomics approach. This slide right here, this is basically the whole game. Our entire investigation hangs on making a shift from the column on the left to the one on the right. We're throwing out all the assumptions and the shoulds and replacing them with hard, measurable data and the hidden incentives behind people's behavior. We're basically trading feelings for facts. Now, this is our number 1 forensic tool, the incentive. It's the motive. It's the reason why. To solve pretty much any case in this book, you have to follow the trail of incentives, whether they're about money, social status, or even morals that are secretly driving what people do. And that brings us to the single most important rule of any investigation. Just because 2 things happen at the same time doesn't mean one caused the other. That's correlation versus causation. Our job is to prove that direct link. And you'll find that this is exactly where most conventional wisdom just completely falls apart. All right, tools are ready. Let's crack open our first case file. And this one, well, it gets personal. We're going to challenge one of the most deeply held beliefs in our society, what it actually takes to be a good parent. You know the official story. It goes something like this. Being a good parent is like following a checklist. Read to your kid every night, take them to museums, you know the drill, and boom, you will produce a successful adult. It's a really comforting idea. But does the evidence actually back that up? So the economists behind this case got their hands on this massive set of data from a huge U.S. education study. They started running the numbers, and they were super careful to separate what was just a correlation from what was actual causation. And the evidence, well, it led them somewhere they did not expect at all. Okay, look closely at this evidence. It's pretty fascinating. The stuff on the left, the things parents actively do, like reading daily, they show a really low correlation with their child's test scores. But the things on the right, what parents are, things like being well-educated or having a high socioeconomic status, show a super high correlation. The data suggests that it's less about the specific activities parents perform and more about the environment they create just by being who they are. All right, case number 1 is in the books. Now let's move on and open our second file. In this one, we're going to investigate a very different kind of incentive, one that's so powerful it can make even the most honorable people do some pretty surprising things. So who are we investigating this time? Well, you might not believe this. School teachers and sumo wrestlers. I know, it sounds crazy. But the data reveals that when you introduce some really high-stakes incentives, both of these groups start to leave behind a trail of evidence that points to the exact same crime: cheating. So how'd they get caught? It wasn't a confession or a smoking gun. It was a clear trail left behind in the data. For the teachers, an algorithm found these bizarre patterns, like an entire class of students suddenly acing the hardest questions on a test. And for the sumo wrestlers, a guy on the verge of losing his rank with a 7-7 record would all of a sudden win his final match way more often than statistics would ever predict. The incentive to cheat created a footprint you could actually measure. And now for our final file. This one tackles a huge social mystery from the end of the 20th century. Why did violent crime in the United States suddenly and dramatically plummet in the 1990s? I mean, everybody had a theory, right? And everybody wanted to take the credit. It was better policing. It was the booming economy. It was gun control. But when our investigators looked at the data, the usual suspects, they just didn't have a strong enough alibi. The numbers didn't really add up. Now, this is by far the book's most controversial finding. The economists just followed the data, and it led them to a really uncomfortable conclusion. They argued that the legalization of abortion back in 1973 led to fewer unwanted children being born into difficult circumstances, and those are the very circumstances that are statistically linked to a higher likelihood of future criminal activity. And then, about 18 years later, right when that generation would have been entering its peak crime years, the crime rate began its historic fall. So, after looking at these three completely different cases, the parent, the cheater, and the criminal, what's the final verdict? What's the one big idea that connects all of them? Well, the evidence from all three cases points to a single, repeatable method of investigation. First, you have to challenge the official story. Second, you analyze the hard data, not your gut feelings or assumptions. And third, you uncover the hidden incentive that's really driving the whole thing. That's the key. And here it is, the final verdict that connects all three of our cases. The parenting outcome was driven by the inherent incentives of a stable home environment. The cheating was a rational response to a high-stakes professional incentive, and that massive crime drop was an unintended consequence of a policy that changed the incentives for an entire generation. In every single case, incentives, not our good intentions, drove the result. And that leaves us with one final thought, and it's really for you to think about. The evidence we've looked at today suggests that these hidden incentives are shaping our world in ways we barely even notice. So, what widely accepted truth in your own life might just be a story we're all telling ourselves, waiting for someone to come along and do a little investigating?